From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on Can TV. I'm Ken Davis, and without further ado and much introduction, Ben Joravsky is joining us here. The venerable Ben Joravsky. And I must say that in our new studio, and really kind of like the second or third show in our fifth year of doing this, or fifth anniversary, whatever it is, Ben was the guest on our first show, and I think it's appropriate that he's the first journalist to be on our show here in the new phase of Chicago Newsroom. Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. For 10 trivia points, who were the other two guests in the first show?
Well, I already know.
Okay.
It was no less than the president of the Chicago Teachers
That's
Union
correct.
and columnist Eric Zorn.
Eric Zorn,
right?
guitar player Eric Zorn.
Guitar player, yeah. So we have lots of ground to cover today with Barbara Byrd-Bennet and the tax situation and Tony Preckwinkle raising cable taxes and everything else.
Billing taxes.
Before that, last week we had the privilege of having our budget director, Alex Holt, on the program with us. And I thought we had an interesting conversation, kind of went a little over time, and we just sort of talked about everything to do with tax increment financing. You are Mr. TIF in Chicago. You have spent your career criticizing the TIF program. Well, I asked you as a favor if you would watch or read the transcript, and I guess you actually did.
I did that, yes. It was anything to do with TIFs. I will.
You'll always devour it. So I would say that among the things that Alex said last week, whether or not she'd ever said it publicly before, I don't know. Apparently she had. But for the first time, I understood that Mayor Rahm Emanuel's budget director concedes that having a TIF program means that all of us pay a little bit more taxes.
Yes.
Now, in the past, I think they had kind of...
Well, the city of Chicago is a bit schizophrenic on this issue. Years ago, when the TIF program as it's used in Chicago was basically invented by Mayor Daley, they steadfastly refused to address the issue that TIFs raise taxes. Somehow or other, I figured that out with the help of other TIF geeks, and I started pounding the drum, TIF raise taxes. And so the city's official position throughout the Daley administration that TIFs do not raise taxes. It was almost just like, don't even worry about it. It's like a magical bean that creates money without raising taxes, even though it's called the Tax Increment Financing Program, hence taxes. And then when Mayor Rahm took over, he convened a blue ribbon panel.
I remember that.
And the blue ribbon panel was actually the first to make the official concession. So Alex was just repeating what the blue ribbon panel uncovered 4 years ago. And the blue ribbon panel said, yes, it's true. There's no way this program would work. Well, they didn't. That's my little. There's no way this program would work. But of course, it raises taxes. So yes, that's. I guess that's important that they concede that it raises taxes. So it's a tax hike. It's a surcharge on the amount they tell you you're going to pay, and it's not a frivolous, trivial amount, as she was sort of suggesting in your show. But last year, when it was low, was $360 million. If the city council were to raise property taxes by $360 million with a direct vote, there would be hand-wringing, there would be discussions.
As there is now.
That's
about how much they're about to raise.
That's about it. And so the fact that this is what makes it such an important program to all mayors, not just Mayor Rahm, but Mayor Daley as well, and why it's so important to someone like Alex Holt, who's the budget director, is that you can raise the money without a hearing, without public debate, without hand-wringing. You can pretend as though it's not a tax hike at all. In fact, that's why I say it's schizophrenic. When the city has a hearing in front of a community group in an area where they want to establish a TIF district, they'll pass out a fact sheet, and right there at the top of the fact sheet, one of the first stipulations is that the TIF will not raise your taxes. and will not divert money from the schools. So while Alex was gracious enough to come on your show and concede that it raises taxes, on the other hand, when they come out before the public, they tell the public it doesn't raise taxes. So I said, that's why I call it they're schizophrenic.
When we got to that point in the conversation, and we were using this weird bathtub analogy that I came up with, that was like, well, here's the problem you have is that the bathtub never quite fills as much, so all of us have to run with our little cups full of money and throw it into the bathtub. Alex made what I thought was a very good point when she said, yes, that's true, but it's no different, and I'm quoting her now, she said, no different than, say, the homeowner exemption that you and I receive, or the exemption that we give to low-income seniors, or the landmark exemptions we give to certain businesses, or industrial exemptions. I mean, there's a whole series of things that are built into the property tax system that take your and my taxes up, but there's a reason for them and a broader policy goal. In other words, you know, there is, we as a society, we as a democracy have decided that there are these things that we want to sort of attach to the tax program to further certain goals that we have. And they do raise the taxes a little bit. She says, in the case of TIF, it may be a couple of dollars.
Oh yeah, it's only $360 million in a bad year.
I'm talking about to the individual.
Yeah, to the individual. Well, first of all, we don't know. I don't know how much the overall TIF tax is. Mike Quigley years ago had two crack researchers look into this, and it's been a while since. But I think I think it was something like they said they added 10% to your tax bill. It's a significant amount of money. I wouldn't diminish it if the money was been spent wisely and prudently. I would be more willing to overlook it. But to your point about the homeowner exemption, the homeowner exemption is a property tax break that's given across the board to all homeowners. It's something that generally the people of the city of Chicago want. So in terms of democracy, it's a widely popular program. If you were to get rid of it, there would be much dissatisfaction. In fact, Mayor Emanuel is advocating that we expand the homeowner exemption. It probably won't happen, but he wants to protect homeowners from his burdensome tax hike, which will, by the way, will also include a TIF tax hike that he's not addressing. The TIF program, on the other hand, is something that is not approved citywide by program. It's approved on a piecemeal basis, TIF district by TIF district, and when they approve the TIF district, they deceive you by telling you it is not a property tax hike. So while from the perspective of the bean counter, who has to figure out how the mayor is going to raise the money to build the things that he wants to build, it's a trivial thing. You know, so from Alex's perspective, and not just Alex, every budget director, it's just a tool. It's just money. I've had budget directors lecture me, Ben, what do you care? This is just how we raise the money to pay the bills. So it is a trivial thing to somebody like that, but to people in Chicago, it's not a trivial thing. It's like a real tax that they're paying that could go to other things.
Address this point, though, that it has over the years become a way for mayors to substitute for the virtual abdication of federal and state governments who used to revenue share with cities, and they don't anymore. So cities are kind of left on their own to try to, I mean, how do you replace that boiler, you know, at Jones, well, not Jones, that's a bad choice.
at Bill Jones with
at Smith Elementary or whatever it is. How do you do it when you can't do it with the capital money that you're raising out of taxes?
Now you're inching toward some version of an honest discussion about this deceitful program. So the honest discussion is that government costs more money than we pretend it costs. And as a result, we're going to have to raise your property taxes to pay for expenses that in the old days were covered by the federal government. That's more or less an honest approach to this program. But of course, we don't want an honest approach to this program. We want to pretend as though we can fund our government without raising property taxes. So again, for the last 4 years, Alex Holt and Mayor Emanuel have been going around telling us we've balanced 4 budgets without raising property taxes. Well, first of all, you haven't balanced any budget. Every budget is unbalanced when it comes to the end of the year. And secondly, every year you do raise property taxes. She just conceded they raise property taxes. It just says it's not a lot of property taxes. I disagree. I think $360 million is a lot of property taxes. So we want to have, if you want to have the honest discussion that you're raising, which is that we desperately need this $360 million, this $400 million, this $500 million, whatever it is, to pay the bills that the federal government is no longer paying. If you want to have that, make that case to the property taxpayers. Don't hide behind the program, hide behind a hidden tax and pretend it doesn't exist. And make it seem like it's a major concession when you admit that you're raising property taxes. So, yeah, I would appreciate that.
Would you think, is it fair to say that Mayor Emanuel has begun to evolve in that way? I mean, he seems to be more open now about talking about the fact that he really actually is in the ringer. He's got to come up with...
The evolution of Rahm Emanuel. He's evolving.
He's just like Hillary Clinton, he's evolving.
I think he's now walking on both legs.
Or Barack Obama evolved.
Yeah,
Everybody
Barack Obama is
evolves.
evolving on his issue.
I mean, is it possible that he's actually more forthright with us now about the fact that there just isn't any money and we have to go out and find it?
If you, I mean, that's interesting. The bar is very low on forthrightness in Chicago with the TIF program. So it's so we finally had a concession 20 years into this program that it actually raises your taxes, but it's not an official concession because, like I said, when the TIF district is enacted, the official city policy is that it doesn't raise your property taxes. So I feel as though you're asking a very interesting question. The great struggle of Mayor Rahm Emanuel to be, what does he want to be, the most transparent?
He wants to be not the guy who preceded him.
Yes, he doesn't want to be the guy who preceded him, whose name I can't remember. Right. But I think Alex Holt actually uttered it on your show. And then, of course, didn't Alex work for the budget department under Mayor Daley? Didn't she not work?
I believe she may have.
So she kept saying, I don't know how Mayor Daley did those things in those days. That was a different administration. But anyway, he doesn't want to be, he realizes that the public has a very skeptical, to put it mildly, attitude toward those 3 letters when they're put together, TIF. And the public may not realize exactly how the scam works, but they know it's a scam, all right? And so he feels compelled to say, I'm going to be different with this scam. I'm going to be transparent about the scam. So I'll have my budget director go on the Ken Davis show and say, yes, big concession here. It raises your taxes, while I go around passing out sheets at all public hearings saying it doesn't raise taxes. So I feel Mayor Emanuel has not quite reached that evolutionary stage of honesty. I'm waiting for it. He's fully give him another 50 years. And, Ben we were on this show, may I remind you, talk about the evolution of budget directors. I don't know if you remember this, speaking of great moments in the Ken Davis show. You once had me on this show with Bill Abel, who was a budget director.
Yes.
I believe Alex worked for Bill at one point at some...
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. I think
and
that's right.
Bill, remember? I have a T-shirt that said, Ben was right about the TIFs. I had that on a T-shirt. So I don't think the mayor is quite at that point of evolutionary development, but he's working there.
You have had relationships with a lot of budget directors, haven't you? Because Alex, of course, has the record. She's been budget director for 4 years, and no one before her has lasted more than, I think, a year.
Is that right?
And a half
My
or something.
God, they should give her like a gold watch or something.
Well, I'm sure there is one waiting for her. Okay, enough of this TIF. Are we ready to move on?
I don't know if it's your call. I can talk about TIFs all day, all night.
I understand, and
we haven't even gotten to the school
I know
part.
That our viewers are saying, "Oh, don't let Ben move on from TIFs." We've barely scratched
no, I have not
the surface.
Explained. I have not explained how they work. Okay. Can I get into increments? Sorry.
One of your other passions is education. You've written a lot about education, and how tragic it is that we had an education superintendent. We had a CEO who was born and bred into the education system, and tragically something went wrong, and she just made a couple of mistakes in judgment, and she's apologized for that. But
Yes,
she was
tearfully.
trying to skim $2 million out of the system.
Yeah.
Where do we begin with this conversation?
Well, obviously you're talking about Barbara Byrd-Bennet, who is no longer the school CEO. Where do we begin with this? You know, it is a sort of a
I can find a place.
Okay.
You and I have watched a lot of graft and corruption and grifterism,
grifter.
over the years
Yeah.
here. But I have a hard time remembering one where somebody was A, stupid enough to basically document the whole thing in emails, and B, just blatant about it. I want 10%. I mean, Paul Powell somewhere is looking at her and saying, "What a pig!" I mean, how could you do that? You can't ask for 10%.
Well, it's funny. That's a reaction I've gotten from many Chicagoans, and if I may segue back to the TIF program. Here we have the TIF program was a scam where they skim off $360 million a year and pretend they're not doing that. But because they're not dumb enough to put it in email going, boy, the taxpayers of Chicago are complete morons. I'm going to skim $360 million. That's acceptable. So this lady, puts in the email, I want my percent. And where's mine? Because I have casinos to go to. And Chicago's reaction is, not that she did it, but I can't believe she's so stupid that she put it in writing. So it's like, people are calling me up. It's a story.
Doesn't she understand the Chicago way?
Yeah.
It's done with a wink and a nod and a touch of the elbow.
Well, actually, that's not completely true because here's how old I am. I can recall one of the scandals from the 80s where I recall they put a microphone in the sugar bowl of a restaurant.
At the, what was the name of the
it was
council?
near
Counselor's Row,
Counselor's
right across
Row.
the
And
street.
so these guys were like divvying up the pie while they were talking. So, I mean, that was before emails. And in this day and age, it'd be, they would be like the mobsters would be typing emails to each other.
I don't know if I should reveal this, but, I used to work for the city, and it was informally said at the city. Good news is for emails, bad news is for the phone.
Okay.
Never put bad news in an email.
Yeah. Well, she probably thought it was good news that she was making $2 million. You gotta look at it from Barbara Byrd-Bennet's perspective, man. She was making $2 million off of it. So, that's the typical Chicago reaction. It is. So how could she be so stupid? Not that she would, the idea, how could she be so corrupt? Everybody assumes that there's a certain amount of corruptness.
Well, it's so bad that she just had to stand up and say, "Okay, you got me." I'm guilty.
There's so many curious things about this. I could go on and on about this thing, but yesterday, my beloved Sun-Times had a quote in it from the school board president at the time who approved this contract, David Vitale, where essentially was saying, if I had to do it all over again, I'd do it all over again because it was a good program and we got our money's worth out of it. I'm like, where do they find these people? You know what I mean?
There's a point where you really just don't have to keep that up anymore.
Yeah, say it. It was a boondoggle. I apologize.
So, there are so many things about this to talk about. Some lost to history public relations guy apparently says at some point in some meeting, or actually, I guess, in an email says, this doesn't look good. This looks like this could be a problem for us. What are we going to do about this? And then that sends a message all the way up the spinal column of the administration. But why? How could it be at that point that? I guess the question is our mayor, our evolving mayor, at some point, isn't he brought into this? Or is he protected by a couple of layers of bureaucrats below him that he maybe didn't honestly know that there was a no-bid contract up for a vote in the Board of Education?
He cannot.
Did he say to somebody, approve that?
Well, first of all, I must just remind our viewers that I was not privy to the innermost.
You weren't there?
I was not there.
Okay, all right.
Okay, but
stipulated.
Here's what we know. This is where this could have legs. Possibly this story beyond Byrd-Bennet's plea or her guilty plea. Okay. At the time, if you go back to 2000, when was it? 2013, the summer of 2013, the city had just closed 50 schools. It was a very controversial decision, and the public was across the board skeptical as to whether we had to close 50 schools, how they went about it. Particularly, it was a sore point in the Black South and West Side communities where the schools were closed. Barbara Byrd-Bennet was a very important person for Mayor Emanuel those days because she was the public face on those closings. She was a Black woman. She was respected, believe it or not, in the education community. And
she announced it while he was out of town.
And while he was out of town skiing on a family vacation, she announced at the school. So she was the public face on this very unpopular decision. As such, it was very important to keep her around. She was a shred of credibility for the mayor on this issue. So now we're in the summer of 2013, after the schools have been closed, and we're leading up to the fall, the start of a new school year, where we're going to be moving thousands of children from one school that was closed into another school that's an incorporation of two separate schools. There's many things that can go wrong with this whole process. You need some sense of stability. The mayor was very vulnerable on this front. He needed to keep Barbara Byrd-Bennet in his office. All of a sudden, she's pushing for this $20 million no-bid contract for principal training program. Well, the school system's broke. The last thing the public school system needs to do is spend $20 million on a principal training program, and particularly a no-bid contract. So it's like, we don't even know, like maybe we could have gotten the same program for $10 million from somebody else to a company that nobody's ever heard of. And so apparently, within the mayor's ranks of advisors, there were a handful of people who were saying, I don't think this looks good. And Barbara Byrd-Bennet was saying, I insist that you adopt this program because I want it. Are you saying I can't run a system?
Right. It was a bit more emotional than that.
Yes.
When you see the
when you see the emails, these are the so somehow or other, somebody in a position of power had to decide between, do I go with the advisors who are saying this looks bad, or do I go with Barbara Byrd-Bennet, who is insisting that my credibility is on the line? There's only one person in Chicago who has the authority to tell all those advisors, no, you're going with Barbara Byrd-Bennet, and that's the mayor. So I don't know if it'll ever come out exactly how he said it, or if he put it in email, or if he put it in a text, but it's pretty obvious to any Chicagoan. All the people who say how dumb she is for putting it in writing are the same people who are saying right now, of course the mayor knew, and of course the mayor signed on to it, because as probably from a political calculation, that $20 million contract was the money he had to spend, he had to commit to keep her aboard, so that she could be the public face on his school closings.
He needed her.
So he does not, now he's in a tricky situation because he does not want to release all the information, all the emails that reporters are demanding, because it could put him in a bad light.
I think it's important, it is important to, you say a low bar here, but I don't think anybody is saying or implying in any way that the mayor knew that she was getting 10% off the top or anything ridiculous like that. If he did participate in the decision to go ahead with the no-bid contract, it was because of political considerations of his own that he needed her. He really needed her to stay, and he was willing to make this compromise, right?
I don't believe Mayor Rahm Emanuel would be dumb enough to sign on to a deal in which he knew she was getting 10% off the top. I would have a hard time believing that. I do know that there was a lot of reason to be exceedingly skeptical as to why she was pushing hard for this deal. Within a month of it being approved, Sarah Karp for Catalyst basically laid out all the reasons to be skeptical. So I have a hard time believing that the mayor wasn't skeptical. And so there's really, he has to justify, in my opinion, to the public why he interceded on her behalf at this juncture. When you had a group of aides saying, I don't know about this. This is questionable,
Yeah.
particularly now when
Yeah.
we're making cuts. And she's insisting on it. Why did he go with her? Why did he think this was a prudent investment of our tax dollars at a time when we're cutting schools?
Well, as you've said, it may have just been a pure political calculation. This is a woman who's very popular, who's done some very difficult, heavy lifting for him, who is African American at a time when African Americans are not happy with him, and it just would have looked really bad.
It would have looked bad. I don't. By the way, just one point. I don't know how popular Barbara Byrd-Bennet ever was. I would hesitate to say she was very popular.
Yeah,
I do know this. He had committed to her as being the public face for these closings. He couldn't, particularly after he just got rid of
J.C.
Brizard.
Right.
You know, like he would look very flaky.
Right.
So
there is. Well, I guess we have 2 minutes left, and I'd like to reserve that for Tony Preckwinkle. Tony Preckwinkle.
You can't go back to TIFs? No, just kidding.
We can if you want, but you only got 90 seconds now. Tony Preckwinkle wants to tax cable TV, which is kind of weird because so many people are using satellite now or internet or whatever else, and that seems like it's kind of like it's a shrinking pool, but we'll have to reserve that for another time. What I found interesting was all the cuts that she proposes to make. Among them, she proposed cutting $710,000 for a drug program that she called irresponsible use of resources. It happened to be in Anita Alvarez's office, and of course she's not happy. But then later last night, she had to pull back on that and say, oh, she found out that it was actually
responsible.
Well, no, that it was grant money and she couldn't cut it anyway. But it seems like she's going after programs that she has sat at this table with us and talked about how she's so concerned about too many people being in prison, too many people being in jail, and now she's cutting a lot of those programs. I'm not quite sure I understand all of this.
Well, Tony Preckwinkle is very much an astute political player, and in this particular case, she has a candidate in the race against Anita Alvarez, so I'm not surprised that she'd be cutting programs or being critical of programs that are run by Anita Alvarez. Politics is very involved. Her problem is, again, it's like Mayor Rahm's problem. She needs money to pay for her bills, and she doesn't have the slush fund. That's a secret tax hike, unfortunately. She probably wishes she did have it. So something's got to give. She's raising cable TV and bowling. My beloved bowling, where did that come from?
You're going to have to move to DuPage County now.
Literally subsidizing everything. Yeah, I'll move to DuPage. I'm not going to pay that bowling tax.
All right. Ben, as always, thank you so much for being here. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And there are just so many other things that we will talk about sometime in the near future. I know you'll come back. I hope you will. Yes. Don't forget, you can see Ben and Mick Dumke at First Tuesdays, every First Tuesday at the Hideout. And by the way, that Sarah Karp thing is online too. If you go to chicagonewsroom.org and just put in Sarah Karp, you can see her sitting here for half an hour explaining how she broke that story. A long time ago, we were on it here on Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis, back to another show next week. Thank you very much for watching, and we will be back. Don't forget, you can see us anytime you want by looking at this address right here at CAN TV. See you next week. Bye.